The world doesn't think that the gospel can change your life, but we know that it can. And that's why we want you to hear these stories of transformation, stories of freedom, people getting free from sin and healed from sin because of Jesus. This is Death to Life.
My assurance of salvation does not include me, other than like me accepting the gospel, obviously. But it's not like I accept the gospel and then I have to do things to stay in the good graces of God. Like, it's not about what I do, but it is like what I do may be the fruit of having the gospel in the first place. Like, if that makes it's not like my favorite saying is the God, your works are not the root of the gospel, it's the fruit of the gospel.
Yo, welcome to the Death to Life podcast. My name is Richard Young, and today's episode is with my brother Josh. Josh Few is a guy I've known for a little while, and his story is just a story of growth, a story of a guy putting pieces together, going through and just seeing the truth of the gospel. And it's cool to hear how it happens in so many different people, and to hear Josh's perspective and what opened his eyes is powerful. And also we get into a conversation of what the gospel actually is near the end. So this is Josh. Buckle up, strap in. Love y'all. Appreciate y'all.
So I actually have to probably start prior to my birth. My parents were an unequally yoked marriage per se, and I will kind of explain that a little bit. So my mom comes from a leadership Adventist family. So my grandpa and his dad, and probably my great grandpa as well, we're all in Adventism. And my great grandpa was one of the traveling evangelists of the denomination. I'll get that out. And so basically, to say that my mom's family was pretty deep in their religion as Adventists, and as such, there was a lot of dentists and doctors. My grandpa was a dean of students for a while for Loma Linda University. And so my mom actually got a degree in dental hygienist. And so they went, my uncle was a dentist in Wyoming. And so she went up to practice under him for a little bit. And that's where my dad lived at the time, was Glen Rock, Wyoming. And his family was not Adventists. Didn't really have any religion at all. I think probably his mom brought him to church every, for the holidays, or all the, like Easter and Christmas maybe, but other than that, they didn't really go to church. And so my dad sees this girl walking down the street in Glen Rock, Wyoming, and is like, man, I really want to get to know her. But instead of like doing it like the normal way, like, hey, you want to go out? Oh, no. So my grandpa owned a tow truck company. And so they had a bunch of cars. And so my dad every day would like drive by where my mom was walking, and eventually figured out what her address was, and said, hey, and sent her flowers and like, hey, can we go on a date? And for, probably wouldn't happen today, but my mom was like, sure, let's go out on a date. And of course the rest is history. However, my grandparents, my mom's parents, were like, told my dad, if you want to marry our daughter, you will become an Adventist and get baptized. So that was how my dad,
from the heart, then, from the deepest of his heart,
Yeah,
He became.
yeah, no, he was like, well, I want to marry this woman, so I'm getting baptized as an Adventist. And so, but being the, strict Adventist family, like he was taught basically all of the strict things. Like, you not only do you not work on Saturday, you do not talk about work on Saturday.
Yeah.
So, and you only eat this. Like my mom, I mean, he was not a vegetarian and suddenly became a vegetarian overnight. He has since left the faith. We'll get into that a little bit later, but he's no longer a vegetarian. But he just had all of the stuff just packed onto him like instantaneously. And so, I was born into this relatively strict. It wasn't like, if I look back at my childhood, it's probably not the strictest, religious family in Adventism, but we definitely were like, you do not do certain things. I actually had, well, once I was born, and got to the age of accountability, which, I remember probably 6 or 7 years old, I had, special Sabbath toys that I could only play with on Sabbath. And if
Were
I
they
played
missionary action figures?
no, I could actually pick. So, like, if I wanted to play with and they give me a little bit of leeway. Like, eventually I could like switch them out every once in a while. So I would pick my cars to play with on Sabbath, but I couldn't play with them the rest of the week, because because they were I think they were trying to instill like you know the Sabbath specialness, and like we don't do the same things that we do the rest of the week. But nobody else in my school friends, they would be out playing after potluck at church on the playground. I wasn't allowed to change my clothes or go play on the playground with them because that was something I did the rest of the week. So, but as a family, like my parents were very ingrained in the church. Didn't really spend a lot of time together other than at church. So they both had jobs. My mom worked nights, my dad was daytime, and then we would all go as a happy family to church on Saturday. And but then my mom was doing Sabbath school. My dad was the head deacon, running the soundboard, doing all this other stuff. I mean, we went to church at like 6:30 in the morning on some days to like shovel the sidewalks and get the church all turned on, ready to go for the day. And so I eventually, once I got to be a teenager, I hated it. Just that aspect of like, so I more or less rebelled, and I was like, I'm not going to church anymore. Like, this was 13, 14 years old. My parents at that time were already struggling with their marital relationship, so they didn't really care what I did at that point. They're like, fine, stay home. My dad would go off into the mountains because we lived in Montana at that time. So my dad would go hiking into the mountains to be with God. And my mom went to church, and I stayed home and watched and did all the things that I wasn't supposed to on Saturday. So, but like eventually, throughout my childhood, I had the opportunity to be mentored by other people other than my parents. So like when we had neighbors that were Adventists next to us, and there was just a group of ladies, and she was like the head elder, and they were nurses. And so I would go over to their house when my parents were gone and, spend time with them. And they were a little less strict than my parents, so I liked them. They played like board games and had other things. I could play with whatever toys they had that I wanted to play with, and so I mean, that to say that's kind of the family that I grew up in. It wasn't like Bible bashing, like here's Ellen White stuff, but it was very much like, let's follow the book as closely as possible without like making our grandparents mad for being apostate or something. But basically, my dad got to the point where he left the church because of of heresy, mainly and he has explained this to me later. We have talked about it, and he's like, yeah, everybody would come up to me and ask me about my job and like, how was my week? And so, but I wasn't supposed to talk about work on Sabbath. And so everybody else was talking about work. So they must not be true Adventists. And then he eventually got to the point where I was like, this is, I don't feel free. So he found his own freedom. He believes the gospel now as well. But,
so he was more conservative. He was more traditional than other people in his mind.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So he eventually like my parents, when I was 15, 16 years old, I was a junior in high school. My parents, got a divorce. They had stopped talking to each other, and there was other issues too, but I think a lot of it stemmed from them just not being able to spend time with each other, because they, were always doing something themselves. But part of that was church life. I have come to the conclusion that I would rather spend time with my family than hold positions in the church. That's part of my journey as well. But based on my childhood upbringing, that's what I saw as a determining factor in why we, like my family, didn't stay together.
Were you upset with God or upset with the church? Or it seems like the church, it just kind of was a thorn in your side for a while.
Not at that time. Like, I don't think even today it is. Like, I wouldn't be the person I am today if I didn't have the upbringing that I did. And like I mentioned a bit earlier, like I had other people in my life that kind of guided my spiritual journey. Like when my parents got divorced, I was already in academy. And so I had like the dean and the chaplain, who at that time was Ron Halverson Jr. So he taught me a lot about the gospel. And so I had a lot of that aspect. It was once I got to academy, it was less about like the rules. The rules in academy were a lot less strict than they were at home. So I enjoyed going to academy. Like, yeah, you have to have a certain, like, you have to wear a tie and like all that other, everything, go to bed at a certain time. But like, other than that, like I was actually more free at academy because I was a firefighter. There was a fire station just across the field. So I would get called at the middle of the night, and I got permission from like the principal and everything. They said, yeah, as long as you're going on an emergency call or whatever, then you can leave in the middle of the night, which like a lot of the other students couldn't do because they didn't have a reason to do it. So I had a lot of freedom, and I had a car at school, and things have gotten stricter as time has gone on in academies due to the changing world. But at that time, like my life was a lot easier. I had, I could go hang out with my friends when I wanted. I could go to town. So academy was fun, and college was even better because I was like far away from my family.
So let me ask you this: who was God? How did he look at you? Was he frustrated? Was he happy? What was God like?
At that point, God was still the, like, if you do certain thing, like you still have to hold to the pillar. So I always was concerned with like paying tithe. Like that was an important thing to do, like going to church on Sabbath. But he wasn't like, I got to the point where he wasn't like concerned with everything that I did. Like it'd be one thing to, find a job that you're just trying to make money on the Sabbath or something. But like at that point, like if you're a doctor or a medical professional or even a firefighter, like I kind of went into the emergency medicine field, EMT firefighter, because, I was helping people and I could do it on the Sabbath. Like,
Hmm.
and it wasn't about the money because I was only making like $5 to $7 an hour at that point doing EMT stuff. Um, but like that was my outlet to kind of get around the rules a little bit, because I found like, oh, you're supposed, like Jesus said, you're supposed to help people on the Sabbath. So it was still kind of a works based thought process, but I found ways to get around it. If that makes sense.
It does make
Theologically
sense.
speaking.
Yeah. So you got to Union College. You wanted to go to EMT.
Yep.
Uh, how did everything go? How did the plans work out?
International rescue relief all the way.
Let's go. IRR, climb the clock tower. If nobody knows what that
Yeah.
is, don't worry about it. That's an
Yep.
inside Adventism Union College joke, but
I live 10 minutes away from it now. So
that's right. You guys moved to Lincoln. So yeah, life was going according to your plan then?
yeah, and as I got accustomed to academy life, like towards the senior year, I got to the point where I was like, yeah, I don't really like following all the rules. So union was good because they were, not only did they have the degree that I wanted, but it was more of a like an open school. Like we would hear people going to Southern, like, wow, you don't have somebody coming into your room to make sure you go to church. Like, no, we can go to whatever church we want to. Like, it's okay. So, I mean, Union was definitely more like free and open. Yeah, we had to have another inside joke is getting your Jesus points. I don't know if
Right.
you heard that before, but like you had to go to all the, like, as many religious programs as you were supposed to. But other than that, you were kind of free to go to whatever church you wanted to, and there was no like time limits. And yeah, we had like religion classes that we had to take, but it was more or less like get your degree done. And at that point, I enjoyed going to church. Like I mentioned earlier, like I took some time and didn't go to church for a while. Once I got to academy, I was kind of forced back into going to church. And then by the time I got to college, it was, oh yeah, church is kind of cool, and of course, Ron Halverson Jr. followed me from
Yeah, that's right.
academy and ended up at Union as well. So I was like, yeah, church is great. Like preaching the gospel and like love your neighbor, love God. It's not about the rules. Like, so it was like college was a good experience. Yeah, and I went through obviously I met my wife there, and that didn't happen until we graduated. But um, yeah.
So you're
College,
living a pretty good life. Um, some ups, some downs. Did your parents divorce and all that? With all that, you're kind of just like moving forward. Seems like you're all right.
yeah, so I never really thought, like you hear of the common theme of like, well, a child always thinks it's their fault that their parents divorced. And by the time my parents divorced, I was older and kind of out of the house and doing my own thing. Because academy, you're taking care of yourself for the most part, for
Right.
most of the day. Like people will make sure you're in your room and stuff, but like you're doing your own laundry, you have your own food and stuff. But like when they divorced, I even had people are like, "Are you okay?" I was like, "Yeah, yeah." I mean, I've seen this coming for years. Like they stopped talking to each other like 5 years prior to when they got divorced. They got separated for a few years before that, and my dad would either not be in the house or like sleeping on the couch. So I was already used to like that scenario where it's just that environment. But at academy, once they divorced, I was like, oh, now I don't have to be. My dad's not a scary person anymore. Like he's not grumpy and angry all the time. Like he's not going to be in the house, so I can go home and have a good time when I go home. But it wasn't like I never thought that it was my fault, because that they had their own. Like my parents individually, when I would visit them, they explained like, no, it's all us. It's all on us. Like, yeah, sometimes we lashed out to you maybe, but like it was never your fault. So I never really had a problem with my parents' divorce. I had more of a problem when they started, my dad got remarried. And so that was a new experience for me. Like I had to like the whole stepmom, like scenario, but that was actually when I was in college. So I was more or less out of the house. I didn't have to deal with most of that stuff, but.
So then life, you go, you meet your wife, life's going well. At this point, God is he different? Or is it still kind of the God of your youth who was kind of about the rules, but love your neighbor? And like what was it at this point after graduating, getting married, going into that for a couple of years?
Yeah. So, I mean, I knew for sure that I didn't want to have a family similar to mine, my upbringing, where it was like all about the rules. So there was definitely some like compromise on, not really compromise, but like thinking differently about different things. Like, well, what if we don't want to cook on, like have to be able to cook on Sabbath? Like, is it okay to go out to eat? And we eventually got to the point of like, well, yeah, that's okay. I mean, even if, because we were in Loma Linda when we got married, like that was the thing that everybody did after church. They just went out to like, spaghetti factory or whatever.
Right.
And that was the thing to do. And so we're like, well, so there was that, but I actually experienced that kind of at Union previously, because, you actually got charged for eating in the cafeteria on Sabbath. And I was like, well, what's the difference between getting charged at the cafeteria and going out to eat? So I was already on the path of that. So it was more or less searching for if these things that I held true my entire life, are they really important? Am I going to lose my faith in God? Am I going to like stop loving God if I, go to the hot springs on Sabbath and go past my ankles? Like, so
what were you finding out?
That it wasn't. Like I was finding out, but I was still like, well, tithe is important, and we still should go. We need to go to church every Sabbath, and do all the main things. But like it was the little things that didn't really matter as much.
Yeah, it's kind of like, how do we decide? And usually it's based on what your parents had decided and whether you're for it or against it. If your parents were like, so for this thing, and you're like, this is terrible, then you're going to go the other way. Or if they were good about it, maybe you're like, yeah, this is what we're going to be like. But that question of like, there's people working in the calf. There's people like,
but you have to eat. Like,
yeah, what are you going to do with that? Because you're in college, and if you look at the Bible, it's not really going to help, because it's like a completely different context, completely different problems. So you actually have to think about these things and decide, yeah, what am I going to do with all this?
Yeah. And as an adult, like that's exactly what we did. We're like, well, our parents like brought us up this way. And of course, my wife's parents are a little more lax than my parents were. So we still had that, like, we had to have a few discussions about like what's important. Like, is it really like, it is going to church every Sabbath and not missing a day, like, is that really a salvational issue? Or like, can we like relax and just spend time with ourselves? And maybe, I mean, it was slightly before the time of live streams. So there like Loma Linda had a live stream, but like none of the other smaller churches had that at that time.
Right.
So you had to go to church if you wanted to get the sermon, But so we had those discussions, and over time we got to the point of, this is how we want to raise our children, and it's not all about all of the rules. Like, God loves you. And so we started finding the gospel a little bit more. And then, of course, we moved to Rapid City. I mean, we moved from Loma Linda, which is a very, like, a more, let's say, progressive or liberal side of Adventism, um, to Rapid City, South Dakota, which was not. So we again had to, like, come to terms with, like, what is important, and it's not whether or not you drink coffee and stuff. And so we had a few years. We moved there in 2015. So we had, we started there, went to church. My wife was working in the hospital. She's a physician. So she was doing her residency. That's how we ended up in Rapid City. We didn't choose to be there. Like, that wasn't
But
our
now
first.
you love it. Shout out to all our Rapid City friends.
No,
We love you guys.
it's been a very good community. But initially, there wasn't a lot of people. We had, there was people that were from Union, but had graduated well before we did, so we didn't really have a community starting out. So we're kind of on our own, and it was kind of tough. But after 3 years, we started. I mean, we had, Krista's best friend is up there. She moved away for a little bit, but now they have they've moved back in 2020. But so we had Krista's friend, and so we made some other friends and started to realize, like, this is where we want to stay. And so after residency, we ended up staying, and then COVID hit in 2020, and of course we had our 2 kids, and my wife being the physician, she's like, well, we probably shouldn't. There was a big, like, the church had a huge controversy over, like, wearing masks versus not wearing masks, and, like, did you get the vaccine versus not? I mean, that's something that was across the board. The whole country was doing this, but it's a little hard when your religion is doing it too, and you don't really feel like you can take a side, because you want people to be healthy, but you want them to have their choice. And so we decided that we would not go to church. And eventually, like, initially it was like, we won't go to church because the country is basically shut down. And then they opened up again, and I think we went 1 week, and it was just very, like, like, there was a split in the church. Like, the people that wore masks were on, like, one side of the church, and the people who didn't wear on the other side, and they were glaring at each other, and we're sitting in the middle, and we're like, let's not go to church for a few more months, So over that time, Krista's best friend moved back to Rapid City, and actually got married to one of my best friends. So we had a part in getting them together. Actually, it's kind of a fun story, but we ended up coming back to Rapid City, and so that's when we started coming back to church, because we at least had a couple of friends that we could we had a bit of a community, and so we started going back to church, and a couple of years after, or I don't remember exactly, it's 2024, so I think it's 2 years ago, the pastor that was there ended up leaving for various reasons. The church wasn't actually still has some difficulty with, like, being loving. So the pastor just decided to leave because he didn't feel loved. And there was some other stuff going on too, but so we actually searched for a pastor for a year, and then we got the current pastor came in about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago. He came in, and I would say he's a more, like, moderate Adventist. So he's not really conservative. He understands, like, there's differences in opinions, but, like, some of the things would come out that were just like, wow, I never thought about this before. Like I don't even remember this as a kid. Like one time there was a baptism. I think it was one of his first baptisms, and it just happened to be a couple, like a Native American couple, and so, which made it even more awkward because he like stood them up front, and they had to like raise their right hand, like they're like protecting the Constitution, joining the military, and basically like we spent 20 minutes, and those of us who have never experienced this before were like, is this even a thing? But there was like, there's
Yeah,
13
you're taking
vows
your
that we need.
vows. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. There's 13 of them. It wasn't the abridged version, like, do you love Jesus and will you support the church? It was like, do you love Jesus and will you keep the 28 fundamental beliefs? And, do you believe, like, do you support everything that Ellen White said? Like, I'm being kind of coy, but that's
No, I've heard them.
13. Yeah. It's kind of, so we're like, wait a minute. So we actually went as a community, like there's just a couple of us would go back to our house, and we're like, well, where is it? Did you agree to this? Like, what is going on? And so we went over that stuff, and we found all of these. If you think the 13 are bad, you should look at the 21 that were back in the early 1900s. That's where these come from. But like we did that's when I started like researching, like, what do I believe? Like wondering, like, do I actually believe this stuff? And did I agree to this when I was baptized? Because I was baptized when I was 12 by my grandpa, who didn't do that. He just like, do you love Jesus? And, do you want to be a member of the church? And dunk. um, so I didn't get that, but it's something that it's on the back of your baptismal certificate that you like sign, that has all of the vows as well. But that's when we all like, we really, that was really the first wake up call to like, is there something more? Why do I feel like this is why do I feel like confined? Why I don't feel free, even though the gospel says I'm free? Like, why is this? And then like a couple, like down the road, there was a communion incident where that had never been brought up to us before, but apparently it's something that's it depends on what church you go to, is whether or not your children can participate. And as a child, I remember my parents being like, no, you will not participate in communion until you're baptized. And so that was the goal, was like, get baptized, I can eat bread and juice in church.
I get the cracker.
Yeah, yeah. But I couldn't do that before. And so we made the decision as a family when we had kids. We're like, well, there's nothing explicitly against, like, Jesus didn't say, do this in remembrance of me unless you're under 12 years old. Like, there's nothing explicitly wrong with giving your children communion. So we're like, fine. And so we did. And then there was, some controversy about like, oh, well, the manual says the church manual says don't let children participate, but they have to be baptized, and anybody that's baptized can participate. And we're like, all right, let's. So eventually, we like had a conversation as a community with the church leadership, and we eventually got to the point of, well, it's a family decision if you want to let your children do that. And it's a teaching thing. Like, it's not like, here's a snack in church. Like, why are you doing? We're pretty adamant about like teaching why we're doing this and what does each part mean and stuff. So, but then like every time something would come up, I would just spend time researching it out. Like, where does this belief come from? And why do I believe it? And and we eventually got to the point where I was like, well, this doesn't matter. This doesn't matter. And then it got to tithe, which was throughout my life was a very important thing. Like, you do not miss like giving your 10% to the church because that's God's storehouse, right? So there's a concert series that happens every year in Rapid City called Hills Alive, and they have like Christian artists that come, and it's a free concert, so there's nothing, you don't have to buy anything. It's a whole weekend thing, and so they have like 3 days of music, and at the end they say, please donate some money so we can do this next year, right? Mm-hmm. And over this course of time, when I'm like discovering what I actually believe, I got to the point where I'm like, can I support this other ministry where I see people like getting baptized into the gospel? Like, can I support this ministry with my tithe? And so I went into like, research mode and did all the research, and eventually came to the conclusion that it doesn't say you have to give your tithe to a specific church. It just says give. And so I was like, well, okay, well, I guess we can do that. So now we give to the church as well, but we may set aside some of our tithe, because it's a percentage of our income to actual giving to other
ministries.
Ministries.
So you were just kind of going through like the fancy word that everybody hates. Not everybody hates. Some people hate. Like, you were deconstructing some of what you believed and going back like, oh, this is why. Did it feel scary?
At first, yeah. Like, I didn't know, like, I was having feelings that I didn't understand, right? Like, wow, like what if I get to the point where my beliefs don't follow the Bible? Like, what do I do then? Do I, does it still make sense? Like, there are people, like, we talk about people that like leave the church, and it's specifically, in an Adventist context, like, oh, all the young people are leaving, and like, oh, it's all because they're, mad about something, or they got church hurt. They don't really talk about the people that leave for theological reasons. We won't go down that rabbit hole, but it's not everybody that's, it's not because the church can't keep people in with like enticing messages or whatever. Sometimes, it's because people find out that their beliefs are predicated on a certain, worldview, and it's tough to leave that worldview. It's tough to look at things in the Bible outside of that worldview, even the gospel. You can look at, and I would say this for any religion, like you have, if you've been brought up in a religion, you have that certain worldview, and everything you believe filters through that.
Sure.
So when I was just like discovering these things, I was looking at just what the Bible says. Like, does the Bible say that I have to tithe to a certain denomination under the new covenant? Because I started studying covenant theology, and there are definitely patterns in the Bible that are completed with the new covenant, which I know you guys have kind of talked about. I think I've seen a couple episodes of something that kind of goes over like the different similarities between the Old and New Testament and stuff. But when I started doing that, I was like, wow, the Bible really, makes sense if you're not just picking and choosing verses and entering yourself into it. And it's not just Adventism that it does this. Like, other denominations do it too. They kind of, I call it hopscotching around the Bible to prove a belief.
Proof texting, some people call it, right?
Yeah, that's what it's called.
Okay, we want to take a quick break right now, and I want to introduce you to my friend Chloe. And Chloe, you've been on the Debt to Life podcast before as a guest. I want to ask you this. If they haven't heard your episode, how long have you been rocking with Good Gospel?
I've been rocking with Good Gospel for 4 years now.
4 years? How did you, real quick, because you have a whole podcast, but how did you come across this message?
Man, I came across this message one summer in the sweet state of Hawaii at summer camp, surrounded by just a beautiful family of believers who just poured in their love and spoke life over me.
That's awesome. How has this understanding and revelation, how has it changed your life?
It's changed every aspect of my life. The biggest thing it's changed is I now know that I'm loved and I have belonging somewhere.
Mercy. So what made you decide to donate of your finances to keep the podcast going?
What made me donate is that these stories need to be told, because I know how much it's impacted me it's one thing to read the Bible, and I encourage that, and it's beautiful, but what really changed my life and really helped a lot of this click for me was hearing the stories and experiences and the testimonies that people had to share. And that's what it impacted my life, because I can see my story in every single person's story on this podcast. Even if they have lived completely different lives from me, I relate to every single person in some way.
Well, thank you so much, Chloe. You're a blessing to us and a testimony to us. And if you would like to donate to get these stories to keep going out there, you can go to lovereality.org and go to donate and donate to the Debt to Life podcast, because we're just convinced that as long as we keep preaching gospel, these stories are going to be out there, and we want to be able to get them out there. So lovereality.org and go to donate, and that would just bless us moving forward. So thank you so much, Chloe, and we're going to get back into the podcast.
So yeah, there was that, and then while we were all doing this, Krista's best friend was like, "Hey, have you heard of this thing called Love Reality?" And of course, the first thing I do, I'm like, get on the internet, look up Love Reality. And this was like 2021, kind of when we were going through all of this stuff in 2022. And unfortunately for you guys, the first thing that came up was an article from our alma mater, the paper that was like totally trashing you guys, like this is wrong, and they're teaching all this stuff, and it's like they're doing all this other stuff, and I'm like, there's only one article, like there's nothing else. Like that was the top
that
search.
Article. A YouTube video was out yesterday, and someone was quoting from that Clock Tower article from a college sophomore from how many years ago it was.
Yep.
That it's I don't know if it's a shame. People go to that thing and they're like, look at this. They still
it's unfortunate. Yeah. But like me, at this point, I've been told my whole life, like, oh, don't read that book because they talk about your religion in a negative manner, or don't talk to that person because they're not in our fold anymore. Like that was pretty much my whole childhood, was like these things would keep coming up about like people saying that it doesn't match up with the Bible, and they're like, no, don't read that book. We won't say which books, but I mean, what happens. So I was like, you know what? I'm tired of people telling me not to go do this, like not to listen to somebody. I'm going to go and listen to their Death to Life. I don't know what series it was at the time, but like it was all Jonathan talking through Adam 1 and Adam 2, and basically the whole premise of what you guys teach. And I was like, this is, from what I have already studied, like this is following the Bible. Like there's nothing here that I wouldn't agree with now. Like 2 years ago, I probably would have been like, yeah, you guys are a little weird. Like, let's not,
Yeah.
But I was already, I think it was a God thing that we were to the point of already exploring like what the gospel actually was. Like, is it about works or is it about Jesus? Like,
Yeah.
is it about what you do? No. So love reality already made sense in some fashion. Like when you came up to Rapid City to do the series that you did, you already know the controversy that the church was having with you, and they're like, no, they can't. He can't come and teach in the church because the conference. I think it was the Mid America Union that said the conference said don't have them in your church. So we're like, well, fine, we're gonna have them. We're gonna rent a space in town and have them come anyway. And so that's what we did. There was quite a bit of controversy over that as well, but it was good. And then I don't know if you remember, but you specifically said to me like, "What does I mean? Is this what you believe or something like that?" I was like, I said, I think I already believe this.
Uh-huh.
I was still on my like the beginning part of my journey. And I still was in kind of the worldview of the religion. I think now I'm even more on board with the gospel than I was then. Like that was like the beginning part. And then every time like we do internet church or something, or I listen to a podcast, I'm like, oh yeah, makes sense. Like, and then of course I'll go read the Bible and find it for myself as well. Cause as I don't know, this is people probably aren't old enough. Some people aren't old enough to remember Reading Rainbow, the TV show. But LeVar Burton would always say, "Don't take my word for it. Go read for yourself." And so I've basically that was the one thing I took from my childhood.
Shout out to public television.
Yeah, I was like, don't take their word for. So I've never like I don't. You probably since you're on my Facebook page, like I'm the facts for the day guy. Like every day I have a fact for the day, and I research that out and make sure that it's sometimes I miss or like it's old information, but for the most part, like I have to make sure that it's actually true before I post it. And so I do that. I do that with theology too.
What was it about? So you hear Jonathan and you're like, okay, this sounds, like I've been unpacking a bunch of this stuff. What he's saying, that sounds like it lines up with scripture. I came out to Rapid City and I think we were sitting at the table or something. And I'm like, yeah, man, like, what do you think? And I always get a tad nervous when it's people that I know, but they haven't seen me in like I've never been a preacher and I still am not really a preacher. I'm just a guy who gets up there and I'm just like, hey, check this out. But I know what I'm saying has got life in it. I know what I'm saying is powerful because I'm preaching the gospel. And I'm like, I could tell that Krista was feeling it a little bit, but I was like, is Josh feeling this? What were you grabbing onto? What was the idea from the gospel that you're like, I like this, or this is different? What was new?
Yeah. I would say it's that it doesn't like my assurance of salvation does not include me, other than like me accepting the gospel, obviously. But it's not like I accept the gospel and then I have to do things to stay in the good graces of God. Like it's not about what I do, but it is like what I do may be the fruit of having the gospel in the first place. Like if that makes it's not like my favorite saying is the God, your works are not the root of the gospel, it's the fruit of the gospel. So
yeah, we just in my Bible study this morning we were in Ephesians 2 and Ephesians 2, what is it, 9 and 10 or something, that it spells it out so beautifully that you have been saved by grace, not of your own doing, it is a gift from God so that no one may boast. And then it says, we are his workmanship, created for good works, that we should walk in them. So you were not saved by works. You were saved for good works that God has set aside before the foundation of the world, that you should walk in them. But there is no boasting in your salvation. Like, you cannot say, you cannot pat yourself on the back. There's no glory that goes to you. Not 1% of your salvation has anything to do with you. You've been saved by the faithfulness of Jesus Christ. You've been saved by grace, not by faith. Faith is the lens that you see the grace. And praise God that those verses are in Scripture. People still can't understand it, or they don't read it.
Yeah.
They want to make sure your works are in there. I get it. But yeah, you were saved by grace, not of your own doing, right?
Yeah. And I would say, lately I have come to the conclusion that the gospel is simple. Like, if you get to the point where you're adding things that either you need to do or God needs to do to the gospel, it's not the gospel anymore. It's the gospel plus. So it's never about what you do or what God is currently doing, for example, but it's already done. Like, you've already been set free from the burden and slavery of sin. Doesn't mean that you're going to stop sinning, but you're free from the repercussions or the
penalty,
the wages of sin.
Yeah.
No longer apply to you.
So understanding, and you say it like it's a huge deal to have assurance, right?
Yeah.
And so much of us were missing that assurance.
Mm-hmm.
So when you got that assurance, what did that open up the door to?
I've been just studying more of the gospel, or studying what other people, not only what Love Reality teaches about the gospel, but exploring like what other denominations teach about the gospel. And from what I have found, for the most part, is that other places are teaching the gospel. So it's not like you guys have discovered the gospel again. It's always been there. You're just bringing it back into like two people that maybe have a different view of the gospel, let's say, and giving them like, this is what the Bible says. Like, it's not. For example, a lot of the retorts to what you guys talk about in the gospel, and quite honestly, the rest of Protestant Christianity, the concern is, well, you're teaching, once saved, always saved. There are very few denominations that actually teach like once saved, always saved. It's always that you are saved by the gospel, and your works will show it after that. Like, it's not that you are saved and you don't have to do anything, like that there's no change in you and you can just do whatever you want and you'll still be saved. It's that your works will show that you have accepted the gospel. Now, it's up for debate what those works are, which is, the factor. But in general, the gospel is out there.
This once saved, always saved. In our background, maybe I don't want to speak for you, but you tell me if you agree. Our background seems to be that we throw once saved, always saved at anything that sounds a little too good to be true or a little scary.
Yep.
We'll say, well, that's once saved, always saved. But once saved, always saved is an actual doctrine that you said not very many people, not very many groups, but there are some groups that believe in this eternal assurance, this doctrine that once you're saved, you'll be saved forever. I know my buddy Matt McMillan, he believes that, and God bless him. That's what he believes. I don't believe that it is impossible for me to stop believing in Jesus. I'm a free agent. And so I hear what Matt's saying. I think from God's perspective, I mean, it's true. But once saved, always saved isn't just that scary. It sounds too good or cheap grace. And people will say, oh, you guys just believe that you can sin and get away with it. And I'm like, were you at the first night? Have you heard, what shall we say then? Are we to continue in sin that grace may abound? By no means. Like, the first night of what we teach, what we preach, is that we are free from sin, not free to sin. Sin is bondage. Sin is slavery. Sin's terrible. I get it. I get why people say that, because they want to make sure that you're doing good works. But even that idea of making sure somebody doing his good works, that doesn't work.
No.
That's not like, you're not living by the Spirit if you have Big Brother watching over you. You are living by the Spirit if Christ is living his life through you. And so that gets tough, because you actually have to spend some time and learn and be ministered to understand these things. These things are spiritual ideas.
Yeah.
And everyone wants just like a list of rules. And I'm like, well, that's not really how it works.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
As I said the other day, I posted it, the gospel is not a system of theology. And so, yeah, if you're adding like, you need to do this, or this is what your works are going to look like, then you're already past what the gospel says.
So the gospel not being a system of theology. Theology is not a bad thing, and it's used to understand the gospel, but the gospel is not that thing.
Yeah. You can't use your system. You can't say that your specific beliefs or fundamentals, if we want to say, are what saves you, because only the gospel is what saves you. Like, I'll use an example. You can ask a Lutheran, a Presbyterian, and a Baptist what the gospel is and get generally the same idea of what the gospel is. But I have found that if you ask, depending on where you are in the country, if you ask several different Adventists what the gospel is, you could get totally different sides of the spectrum. One is like, oh, it's all, it's grace plus works. The other side already like listened to you guys and said it's not about what you do, and it's not, so but there are definitely religions out there that state you need to follow this path in order to be saved, whereas a lot of Protestants, at least at the organizational level, will say, yeah, we have different beliefs on the small stuff, like, state of the dead or baptism, like, but we have the same gospel. And I have listened to enough. I run 15 miles a week, split between 3 days. So I stick like a podcast in my ear, and I'm running down the road and listening to other points of view on the gospel, just to see, like, what do other people say? Does what they say the Bible says, is that what it means? Like, and so, like, I have found that the gospel, the same gospel that you guys are teaching in Love Reality, which I also listen to all your podcasts and stuff, is very similar to what is outside of my current religion. So it's kind of like a mind-blowing moment to realize that other people, since the first century, have had the gospel. Like,
yeah. So you made a Facebook post that Jonathan saw, and I think it kind of jump-started him, because it's just like, we have wave 1, and he's like, now we're doing wave 0. And the Facebook post was that the gospel is not the life of Jesus. walk me through that. How did you come to that understanding?
So after listening to you guys and like kind of reading the where Paul talks about the gospel, I found someone that posted a paragraph out of a book, and like it was basically like the gospel is Jesus's life, death, and resurrection. And I was like, something clicked in my mind, and I was like, wait, I read that somewhere, and it doesn't match. Like it doesn't like it's not that's not what the Bible text says, and I think it's First Corinthians, is it 13 or 15?
15 is the one that kind of he breaks it down. 15.
15, yep. And so I went back and read it, and it was like, this is the gospel, and this is just Jesus's death, burial, and resurrection. And I was like, his life isn't like included in that explanation of the gospel. Yes, we should, strive. Our works will be more.
We should walk like him, right? John says in First John that if he walked this way, we should walk in the same way.
Yeah. So there's that, but that's not like what saves you. It's Jesus's death, to take the wages of sin, burial for 3 days to show that he was actually dead, and then resurrection to show that he beat death and is the only way to God. Like he is God, but yeah. So I was like, wait, I mean, it doesn't make like where do we get the idea of life, death, and resurrection? And so I had to dig into the specific belief in Adventism that talks about the gospel, and it's there in Jesus's life, death, and resurrection is what it says, and then it extrapolates further by saying Jesus is our perfect example of perfect example. Basically, that we part of the gospel is that we are living like Jesus but it sounds more like the root. If you read the actual belief, it sounds like the root of the gospel is, Jesus died for you, but he's going to help you live like he did because he's the example.
So let me ask it this way.
That's why I made that post, right? Like
it was seriously?
Because
I didn't know that.
The belief is different than what's in the Bible.
Yeah. So the idea, okay, help me with this. Help me reconcile these two ideas. That the gospel is the death, burial, and resurrection, and yet we ought to walk like he walks. Does that even need reconciliation? Or that's just like, this is the gospel, and this is how you should live, but that's not the gospel.
How are we reconciled to God?
We have been through Jesus's death, burial, and resurrection.
Yeah. So even if we were able to live like Jesus, is that what reconciles us to God?
No.
Then that would be my answer.
Yeah. And this isn't like a get out of jail free card. I think sometimes when people, if they have a certain mindset, and I think the mindset is this: what do I need to do to be saved? Tell me what I need to do. It's this idea that the kingdom of heaven hasn't actually come yet. The kingdom of heaven is heaven. It's like one day when we die. It isn't God pouring himself into humanity now so that we can love and we can, like, we bring peace now. We bring joy now. And so with that mindset, we're looking at the Bible as basic instructions before leaving earth, rather than this is what has actually happened and this is what your inheritance is.
Well, and you also have to realize that the Bible is written to a specific group of people at a specific time. So when you start, if you start porting yourself into the Bible, you can get all sorts of like wrong ways. You have to, like, I have found that yes, there is an application to us now, but I have to first understand what the original meaning was to the audience that it was written to.
So, getting a revelation of the gospel, what has it done for your day to day? I mean, it sounds like you have a great grasp on what has actually been accomplished by Jesus. But if it's just a good grasp on something that has been accomplished by Jesus, then that's what it is. It isn't a transforming power like the gospel, how Paul describes it in Romans chapter 1. What has it done in your life?
I think about things differently. Like, it's not about what I'm doing. It's more about, like, am I loving God and am I loving my neighbor? Is what I am doing mirroring what the gospel has done for me, or, like, am I trying to do things on my own? And there's still, like, there are definitely times that I'm like, well, why am I doing this? Like, am I doing it because I'm trying to get God to do something, or am I doing it? Am I not thinking about it? There are times that I do something without thinking about it, and I think that's the freedom of the gospel, and knowing that it's all about Jesus. It's not. There's nothing that I could do. Jesus loves me the way I am. Yeah, there is a change when the gospel is recognized in you. Like, there's definitely a change that happens, and potentially I'm still a little bit on that journey. Like, I'm still finding pieces of the gospel where I'm like, wow, that's, like, I didn't think about that before. But, like, it's definitely changed my attitude and, how I treat my family. It's not like, oh, I'm a little bit more, like, open to the changes in my life. So,
Man, that's I want to read this. This is Ephesians chapter 2, what we were just talking about. And he says, I'll edit this part out when I'm looking for it. I'm going to find it.
that's fine.
Okay. Verse 7 says, so that in the coming ages he might show the immeasurable riches of his grace and kindness towards us in Christ Jesus. So he's talking that God is rich in mercy. He loved us with a great love. Even when we were dead in our trespasses, he made us alive. By grace, we have been saved. And that in the time to come, our eyes are going to be opened to what all of this actually means. Mm-hmm. So when you say, yeah, I'm still in, stuff's getting unpacked for me. Yeah.
It probably will never cease.
Yeah, that's what's going to be happening. Our eyes are open to see it. And Paul says that in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, that we couldn't even glimpse it if we don't have the Spirit, because spiritual things are discerned spiritually.
Yeah.
And so in the coming ages, our eyes are going to be open more and more to what is ours, not what we have to do, but what our inheritance is with the rest of the saints.
Yeah.
And I'm down with that. I'm down to grow and see and let that just change me and how I operate. And I'm just going to grab onto it. I'm already a winner through him who lives in me.
Yeah.
Is that cool? Is that fair enough? Like, we don't have the whole eyes wide open yet because we're just trying to grab a hold of some of it, right?
Yeah. And I would say, like, the gospel reaches people differently. Like, sometimes you're totally the other direction, and you see the gospel, and it's like, wow, like it's totally like a flip turnaround, like total change in character and the person, and there. I mean, it's there's nothing wrong with it. Like that happens a lot. But I would say, like for myself, like I got pieces of the gospel through my life, so it was more of a like gradual, like coming to the realization of what the true gospel is. But I already had pieces of it, so it wasn't like where you experience like this great like change in your life. It's just like I've been getting little pieces, and like Love Reality is part of that, and kind of sent me maybe on a different path of finding the gospel than I probably would have otherwise.
So what would you say to young Josh? Let's pick young Josh who's staying at home to play video games instead of going to church, who is kind of frustrated at religion. I think I would put my arm around him. I'd say, like, I get it, bro. Yeah. What would you say to him?
This isn't the end. Like, it's you'll find the gospel. Like, I mean, I would probably tell him earlier what the gospel is. Like, it's not about all these rules. Don't be mad at your parents. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm mad at anybody that helped bring me up. Like, they're only subject to what they understand themselves. Like, so I would give myself like a jump start to the gospel earlier, and I think I was a reasonable kid. I would like, oh, well, maybe I need to like read the Bible more, because I totally like was like, well, if this is what the Bible is, I don't want to read it when I was a kid. So
fair enough, man. Love your family. And I see, is that Captain? Did he go somewhere else? Where is he? You guys have been a blessing to us. You're a blessing to our community, and we love to see how you guys are stewarding this thing. And man, we're just excited to see more life and how we grow in truth, man. So thank you for just being on this journey with us, and thank you for sharing your testimony today.
You're welcome.
Yeah, Josh's story, it resonates with me a lot, because sometimes we know that something is missing. We don't know that we know that. Like, there's the back of our mind, like, this can't be it. And then the truth comes in, and it's so powerful to see, oh, this is what it's been all along. I just didn't know it. And so if that's the position that you're in, if you're going along and you're like, this can't be it, this gospel is okay news, it's not good news, then this prayer is for you. Father, open the eyes of my heart so that I can see and receive what you have given me in your Son, Jesus. The salvation you've given me in him, the wisdom you've given me in him, the justification, the righteousness, the wisdom. Open my eyes to my inheritance so I can receive it today. In your name, I pray. Amen. All right, I'm about to jump on the Death to Life Bible study because it's Monday night. If you're open on a Monday night, you should join us. Go to lovereality.org/circles to get all the information on where we meet during the week. It is an amazing time. Hopefully, we'll see you at one of these. Love y'all. Appreciate y'all. Bye.